Lesson 8 of 12 of Job's questions and God's answers have seen many discussions take place between Job and his friends. We've not looked at the discussions, we're just picking out some things that Job has asked. And after all has been said, Job now asks, is anyone listening to me? Job 31 verse 35, if only someone would listen to me. So this statement is found in Job 31 and verse 35. If only someone would listen to me, look, I will sign my name to my defense. Let the Almighty answer me. Let my accuser write out the charges against me. And then when we come over to the New Testament, to Hebrews, of course, being a great book to look at as we consider what went on in the law in the Old Testament. But it says in Hebrews 4:15 and 16, this high priest of ours understands our weaknesses, for he faced all of the same testings we do, yet he did not sin. So let us come boldly to the throne of our gracious God. There we will receive his mercy, and we will find grace to help us when we need it most. So on this occasion, and with these words, Job seems to be offering a direct challenge to God. Quite a forceful one. Let the Almighty answer me. The rounds of speeches with his friends are concluding. In their third and last speeches, Eliphaz and Bildad had spoken, and Job had answered. So far, it seems I have nothing to say now. Evidently, after a pause, Job gave his final speech. He recalls the prosperity of his former good life, but then he spoke of the calamity that had followed it. Now, he did this to show that he was justified in complaining. He had a right to complain because of all the things that had happened to him. As usual in this round of talks, Eliphaz and Bildad continued their same old argument that the sufferings of Job are evidence of his sin. Job answered this by again declaring his innocence, and it is within these words that he gave out this challenge. All the way through, he'd been misunderstood by the men who had come to comfort him. Along with that, he felt that he could not contact God. To be frank, he seems to have felt at this point that God was not interested in what he had to say. This, of course, represents a shared human experience, doesn't it? In those times when a person is overwhelmed with sorrow, difficulties that seem to have neither reason nor explanation, and we search and we cry out for an answer and don't even seem to be listened to. The language that Job is using is like that of a court of law, and he wanted, it seems, to follow a judicial process. The word translated into the English as either accuser or adversary, it is a legal one, and we understand it these days as the prosecutor or the prosecution. It refers to the one who is conducting the case against a defendant. In Job's mind, God was the prosecutor and he himself was the defendant. Now, in the ancient courts of law, as they are today, two things were always demanded. First, the prosecutor must state the charge. Second, the defendant makes a statement which is in rebuttal of the charge that's been made against them. The order of procedure was that the prosecutor first states the case and then the defence. Now, the position of Job, as revealed in this appeal, was that he'd never had the case against him stated by a prosecutor. However, he had still prepared his defence. This is affirmed in the words, look, I will sign my name to my defence. Let the Almighty answer me. So the position Job took was that he had made his defence and signed it without even having heard any charge against him. We have to say that in a sense he was quite right. God had made no charge against him, apart from declaring him blameless and upright, but why would anyone take you to court for that? Job felt, however, that there must be a charge, an accusation of wrongdoing that would account for these extreme experiences that he's undergone. It is as though Job has been arrested, but has not been told why. Over and over again, he had to listen to his friends. Job knew that these men were not his judges, and they had no right to bring any charge against him. He knew that the only one who had that right was God himself. He was convinced of this. David also had this understanding in Psalm 51, written after the realization of how far he'd fallen with his adultery, leading to the murder of an innocent man. He cried out to God and said, "Against you, and you only have I sinned." What about the family of Uriah? Were they not sinned against? Whose law was broken? Not theirs, it was God's. Job, it seems, had an awareness of the ultimate court of law to which every person has a right to make their appeal. The heartbreaking agony was that it seemed he was not getting the hearing in court that he desired. The appeal, of course, is to that final judgment by the one whose knowledge is perfect and whose decisions will be impartial and just. There is no court that fulfills this ideal perfectly on earth. We won't find it until we stand face to face with God. This is what Job was asking for. Now, until there is an awareness of God, until there is a recognition of who he is, we won't get it. If we originated with a big bang, if we came about after billions of years of accidental improvements, none of this makes sense. Job was arguing from a universal morality, a morality determined by God, our Creator. Without that, none of what we look at in Job has any sense or meaning. The appeal that Job made was based on there being a moral universe over which God is sovereign and in which he governs. Job, conscious of his innocence, appealed to God. David, conscious of his guilt, said, "Against you, and you only have I sinned." The common denominator is that great judge, who is judge over all. Whether it is a sense of innocence or a sense of guilt, it has to be based on a moral standard, an absolute. Job, believing this, makes his final appeal to this ultimate court. He desires to be judged in that court by God, and he will accept the verdict that's found there. The truth is illustrated on another occasion in the history of David, when he had failed, and punishment was inevitable. He said, "I'm in a desperate situation." David replied to Gad, "But let me fall into the hands of the Lord, for his mercy is very great. Do not let me fall into human hands," in 1 Chronicles 21 and verse 13. Why God and not other people? You see, this statement carries considerable importance. During periods of personal difficulty, complexity, or moral reflection, people frequently look for solutions that surpass human perspective and judgment, seeking to address such matters through an appeal to a higher authority. It is not uncommon for people who previously expressed little or no interest in religious concepts to speak phrases such as "God is my witness," when aiming to assert the truthfulness of their claims. Now, considering all this and Job's words, we are prompted to question whether access to that court and appearance before that judge are actually possible. Job's expressions convey a profound sense of need and longing. The question is, was there a response to Job's appeal? When we arrive at the New Testament, and in particular to the book of Hebrews, we have revealed to us that not only is there someone listening, but that listener understands us. This high priest of ours understands our weaknesses, for he faced all of the same testings that we do, yet he did not sin. So let us come boldly to the throne of our gracious God. There we will receive his mercy, and we will find grace to help us when we need it most. Our passage from Hebrews 4:15-16. The feeling that our great high priest is so far removed from us as he resides above the heavens causes us to think that such a vast separation makes him incapable of proper sympathy for humans and their temptations and their suffering. The writer here is emphasizing that Jesus, the Son of God, knows all about human problems, even temptation, and that he is therefore qualified to provide the utmost sympathy and understanding for our human weakness. To truly believe that Jesus can sympathize is difficult. There's no satisfactory explanation of how any person, even the Son of God, could be tempted to do anything that it's impossible for them to do. Without the possibility of giving in to sin, how can there be any such thing as temptation? Now, in advocating the view that Jesus could have sinned, there's no intention to reflect in any way against the purity and the holiness of our Master. Milligan, in his writings, says this: "No inclination to evil ever defiled his pure spirit. The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eye, and the pride of life had no place in his affections, and hence, though tempted by the devil through all the avenues and natural desires of the human heart, he was still without sin." Christ had taken upon himself the limitations of human flesh. As a man, Christ certainly had the capability of doing wrong if he'd decided to do so. And absolutely no logical refutation appears in any of the writings seen on this subject that can explain how any person can be tempted to do that which is impossible for them to do. We could hazard a guess. We could conjecture as to the greatest temptation of Christ. It was probably to call the whole thing off, to abort his mission of redemption, call for the legions of angels that he knew he could do if he wanted, to overwhelm his enemies with destruction. That would consign the human race to oblivion, a fate that's fully deserved because of our sin. And that such a temptation did occur is seen in Christ mentioning the 12 legions of angels in Matthew 26:53 that he could call on. It's only his great love for us that stopped him from doing it. This whole field of thought is clouded with the veil through which we see dimly in 1 Corinthians 13 and verse 12. So people might ask, how could Christ be tempted in all points since he had no children, he didn't grow old, he never married, he wasn't in business, he didn't go through these regular things of life, and therefore didn't pass through every situation that produces temptation? Such a question overlooks the fact that the basic elements of temptation are actually very few in number. And just as all of the melodies ever written can be broken down into a few notes of all the musical scales, all human temptation is seen in three basic principles: the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life in 1 John 2:16. Christ, of course, was thoroughly tempted and tested in all these areas, and yet without sin. John, the gospel writer and also the writer of the three letters, writes that the child of God cannot sin. Think of it this way: you cannot park on double yellow lines. But has anyone ever parked on a double yellow line? Of course. But you cannot, because it's against the law. You're breaking the law. But you choose to break the law. Jesus never did. You cannot park on double yellow lines, and when you do, there is a price to pay. You are fined. You don't get off with it. So don't do it. Don't park there. But we're tempted to do it. Well, I just run in. Jesus never was. We are told to come boldly to the throne of our gracious God, where we will receive his mercy and we will find grace to help us when we need it most in that 16th verse of Hebrews 4. The throne of grace is the throne of God, and a throne, of course, depicts rule and authority. The existence of such a thing as God's throne reveals that the universe is controlled and governed, and that there is a centre of power and authority. And here it's called the throne of grace. The universe is therefore not like a clock left to run down. God is upon the throne, governing. The government of all things is personal. It's not a computer, but a throne. Not a blind, senseless matter, but a person on that throne. Not merely law, but the will of the one who is on the throne. This is the concept of universal government, which is explicit in this mention of the throne, with all the power that goes with it. Such a throne, with its foundation of righteousness and justice, already mentioned in Hebrews 1, reveals the antagonism between God and evil, showing that eternal justice will prevail infinitely through the whole universe. That throne, being called a throne of grace, makes the control centre appear as a source of mercy for the sinful, fallen people of the world. It's also called the throne of God and the throne of the Lamb in Revelation 22:3. From the midst of our earthly, worldly mess, from our place of death and sin and shame, we are called to focus our spiritual sight to that throne, where the Lamb that was sacrificed is seated and is clothed with a cloak of total authority. We are commanded to approach this throne of grace. Why? The one who knows, the one who understands our very nature, Jesus Christ, is seated there. He has tasted every temptation, passed through every sorrow. He knows. Out of his loving heart there flows an eternal tide of love, sympathy and understanding for humans. The suffering, the dreadful trials of our life on earth are understood by him, and he eagerly anticipates our enduring them and entering to his kingdom. He demands only that we love him. He's able to save all that come to God by him. So Job makes the demand. If only someone would listen to me. Look, I will sign my name to my defence. Let the Almighty answer me. Let my accuser write out the charges against me in Job 31 and 35. And it's as though Jesus answers, I'm your high priest. I understand your weaknesses, but I didn't sin. Not just so I can judge you, but so that I can save you. Because of this, if we want to be heard, let it be known, we can come boldly to the throne of our gracious God. There we will receive his mercy, and we will find grace to help us when we need it most. Hebrews 4:15 and 16. Job had written out his defence, and the beauty about this is he doesn't need it. Jesus is our defender. He has bought our salvation on the cross at Calvary, and he can plead our case, and he will win that case if we will only but trust in him and endure the trials of this life without turning away from him.